33 più me. Sono felice.
Vediamo come sono fatti questi signori. Senti, c'è anche
lui lo sa, lo deve vedere.
torniamo alla commissione. Allora, chi si è? Who has joined us? Eccolo qua, si sta qua. Io sei qua. No, ma scusami, ma chi era il Al Capone? Tu? Io Al Capone, ma non so la verità. Non ha detto niente, scusa senza chiaro, avevo confuso. E chi altro c'è più? Siamo gli stessi, c'è il fondo. Molto bene, my dear friends. What we have to do now is what follows. We're gonna go ahead with these slides, okay, that we have just started examining. Presumably it will take us around 1 hour. Then we will have finished the part of capital structure 101. We will start working on the Diageo case, which means that Niccolò Nirino is going to present you some questions that hopefully you can answer, okay, by reading the case and preparing it for those who are at home individually. It's an alternative. For those who are here, if you prefer, in small groups. I estimate that, actually I haven't seen your questions. How many questions you have?
6.
What?
6. 6.
6 questions, sophisticated ones or?
Yes.
So, presumably, if I know it, it's gonna be
Very easy.
10 minutes. So anyway, let's say 1 hour preparation, I think it's enough. So say 3 to 4, then we have a coffee break, 1/2 coffee breaks. So that, say, from 4:15, 4:30, depends on how long we will go with some of the topics. We're gonna debrief the case, and he's gonna present you his solutions to the questions that he's gonna ask you. Okay, is that okay for you? Then what we have to do next Wednesday, because we still have 5 hours together, is basically one thing. Hybrid securities introduction, hybrid securities case study, promise. And that's my part of the course. Then from the following day you have Professor Almeida, and you know that he's covering how to issue securities, payout policy, and risk management. Okay? Do you have questions, my dear friends? Let me remind to those of you, especially at home, which were not connected at the beginning of our meeting at 12:30, roughly speaking, that the retake exam that is going to occur next Monday is going to be in written form with 40 minutes, 20 questions, multiple choices. Okay, great.
Posso rubare un secondo?
Certo.
Volevo, in order to avoid misunderstanding, I want to inform students that starting from next 29th November, all the students must take the exam with the current program. In any case, because I received some emails, so I think that it's important to clarify this point. Thank you very much.
Felice, sembri un capo di un campo di concentramento.
No, sono la voce, non può rauca.
No, è un uomo più buono del mondo.
Absolutely.
No, si dà un tono. Okay, you did get the point. So what he basically said is it's not addressed to
Ha
you,
fatto l'esame.
but in case somebody at home
Cosa aveva la testa?
is reattending the course from previous years,
Sì, quello non è
just to
bene.
inform him or her that his or her exam is going to be held on this program, not the program of his or her initial year.
Ah, è terribile.
Ok? Molto bene. Molto bene, andiamo avanti.
他根本没听懂他在说啥。
We have interrupted our presentation on by introducing these 5 alternative methodologies for
Devi switchare.
Dovrei switchare dalla lavata.
diciamo, scusate. Devo switchare così. Corretto?
Sì. Ma quel numero qui è 8, no?
Okay. So we finished before the lunch break having introduced actually the 5 possible alternatives for reaching the optimal capital structure of the firm. So with this table here, we have also exhausted point number 2 of the previous slide. What the rest of the hour, the rest of the first session, say, is going to be dedicated to is the 3rd point on this slide, which is the financial manager is finally called to decide the kind of financial debt the company should have. Okay? And this is what we're now going to address. What are we talking about first and foremost before entering into the details? We are basically dealing with the idea that the financial manager, once he or she has decided how much debt his or her company should have, the immediate following step is what kind of debt? And the answer to this question relates at least to 3 important elements. The maturity of debt, the so-called basis structure of debt, and finally, the currency in which the debt is denominated. Okay? There are normally other elements that also contribute in defining the overall tailoring of debt according to the needs of the company. For example, should it be plain vanilla or convertible? But I would say that these 3 issues are by far the most important ones. Okay? And what we're going to do now is to first introduce the 3 alternatives and then examine together how to deal with each of them. Okay, Francesca? Sono il tuo nightmare ormai. Lei deve mostrare attenzione, se no mi inquieto. Maturity structure of debt. It means how long should be the maturity of our debt? In other words, should we go for short-term debt? Should we go for long-term debt? Should we go for an average between short and long-term? This, as you can imagine, is a rather important element of debt financing of a firm to decide how long should be the maturity of the debt. When we refer to maturity structure, we refer simply to that. Second element the basis of the debt. In other words, the kind of interest rate that it would be more appropriate to have for your company. And basically here the alternatives are two: fixed versus floating rate debt. Fixed rate, fixed interest rate, or floating interest rate. Okay? There are, needless to say, also some intermediate solutions, debts which start being floating and then they can be converted into fixed. There are debts which do not necessarily have a coupon, the so-called zero coupon debt. True, everything is true, but it is also true that the overwhelming majority of circumstances that with which we deal with debt relates to fixed versus floating. Okay. Finally, the currency structure of debt, as the name says, the currency means the currency in which it is more, we believe it could be more appropriate to finance our firm. And the alternative here is very simple. Again, the dichotomy is between local currency and foreign exchange currency, where local currency by default, by definition, we imply the currency in which the financial statements of the firm that we are considering are expressed. Are denominated. So if a French company prepares the annual report in euros, the local currency is euro. If a Côte d'Ivoire company prepares, and don't ask me why, it's just an example for saying something, Ivory Coast produces the financial statements in American dollars, the local currency in that case will be American dollars. Okay? So normally we refer to as local to the so-called functional currency, which means the currency in which the statements are denominated. Okay? Great. Having said that, let's deal with each of these three elements individually. Let's start with the maturity structure of debt, which probably is the most intriguing and simple thing that needs to be examined. Here, I want to cut a long story short. There is a principle in finance that is strictly related to these specific aspects of financial decisions that says what follows. It's not a principle of finance, it's a principle of good old common sense. It says, if you are dealing with selecting or choosing the appropriate maturity of your debt, a good rule, the principle, would suggest you to match as much as possible the duration of the assets that you have in your balance sheet with the duration of your liabilities. By doing so, you are hedging, you are covering, you are protecting your shareholders' equity. Okay? This is called, variously called, it could be called matching principle, hedging principle, plus other definitions. But the idea is that if you have an average maturity of the assets, which is, say, 5 years, a good idea is to finance yourself even better. Finance those assets with a maturity that is around 5 years, so that you have a perfect matching between the duration of assets and the duration of liabilities. This is a principle that applies also in our daily life, as I told you yesterday, I believe, not 2 days ago, when I told you that you're not expected to finance the purchase of an apartment for you with a bank overnight draft. You're expected, if you need, to finance the acquisition of a new apartment it's going to be used by yourself with a long-term loan. Why? Because that asset, the apartment for you is a long-term investment, and you should finance it with a long-term financing. You see, even individually, we apply this principle, this good sense rule, common sense rule, I would say. Okay. Now, if that's the principle that I believe it can be easily shared, and I have no comments on that. Needless to say, there are two things that we must deal with. The first one, if we follow this rule, this matching principle, what are the advantages? Okay, I understand that we do it. But why should we do it? I mean, in other words, okay, I understand also the philosophy behind it. But what are the real pragmatic advantages that we may get? And secondly, probably even more important, how the hell do we apply it in practice? As I told you, we try and see in this course to be as pragmatic as possible, although the things may appear quite methodological, quite distant from the art. That's exactly what you should never think about these things, because this concerns with literally daily decisions of companies. We needed to finance a new investment. Should we go with debt or equity? And if we go with debt, should we go with short-term debt or long-term debt? Imagine that these are things that are quite practical, I would say. In any case, let's deal with the first question that I was addressing poc'anzi, which is, what are the advantages of following these principles? The advantages are written in point 1 and point 2, okay? They are interlinked, needless to say, so let me present them the way they are reported on the slide, although they are two sides of the same coin. First, because by doing so, companies tend to have a lower cost of debt, and thus a lower weighted average cost of capital, and thus a higher value, enterprise value. Okay, and let's comment first these bullet point number 1. Why should they have a lower cost of debt if they match if they have a matching between assets and liabilities? Because they become less risky. If you are matching the cash inflows with the cash outflows, you tend to be less risky for creditors, because there is no mismatching between the duration of assets, cash inflows, and the duration of liabilities, cash outflows. And by definition, you become less risky. Okay? When you get the money, you pay. Even intuitively, it makes sense for creditors. So when you pay before you get the money, or you pay much later than when you get the money. Even in this case, it's not exactly a good idea for creditors, because creditors would like to get paid as soon as you get the money, without you having the temptation of being distracted by other investments rather than reimbursing the debt. So that concerns bullet point number 1. Bullet point number 2, because they can afford having a higher amount of debt and higher desired debt ratio. That's, as I told you, the other side of the coin of what we have just seen. If the company becomes less risky by matching assets and liabilities, all other things equal, ceteris paribus, it tends to have a higher borrowing capacity. In other words, creditors would be more likely to be willing to give a higher amount of money to companies which are harmoniously managed in terms of assets and liabilities. Okay? And then these 2 bullet points concern why should we do that? What are the advantages that we may get? Now we're going to enter into how the hell do we apply this principle. Okay? And there are basically 2 alternatives. Actually, the idea is the following. Pay attention to what I'm telling you, because it's suppose that somebody in your company or in the company for which you work is asking you, okay, we want to borrow money with a maturity that is similar to the duration, to the maturity of the assets. Okay? Can you please help us in applying this principle? These are the data, this is everything that you need for your estimate / calculations. What is, when you start working, okay? The first thing that you start wondering is, I need to estimate the average maturity of the assets. So that once I know the assets, I can say to my boss, to the owner, to myself if it is my company, this is the maturity of assets, the average maturity of assets, 5 years, 3 years, whatever it comes out from my analysis. I should go for that, which is more or less the same maturity. Okay? So our problem when applying this matching principle is first and foremost to compute, to estimate, it's an estimate, to estimate the maturity or duration of the assets. Okay? To this regard, there are at least two methodologies, practical methodologies that you can follow. The first one, let's call it regression approach. The second one is more accounting approach. Let's start with the first one. Then I will show you also an example, by the way. One way for computing the duration of assets is by regressing, it's underlined, regressing the changes in the asset value if companies are listed, or in the operating profit for all companies, no matter if they're listed or not, on the interest rate changes. So the first methodology would tell you is based on the regression between the delta of the asset value of the firm. That's the, let me go to it's the, you know the simple univariate linear regression line, right? Y is equal to alpha plus beta x I, right? What I'm saying is that the Y of our, the dependent variable, okay, the dependent variable is the asset, the changes in the asset value, while the dependent variable or the regressor is the delta interest rate change. However, you may argue that the dependent variable, the Y, named as delta asset value, is in some cases impossible to estimate. Why? What are the cases in which you don't have the asset value? When the company is not listed. Is there any other proxy that we could use substituting the asset value with something else? The answer is yes, we do have it. One possibility is the delta operating profit or operating income. Okay, this is why, because the idea is that the asset value of a firm is a function of the profit that the company can generate. I generate some profits and thus the assets have a certain value. So if I cannot use the asset value, I go to the source of the value of the assets value, which is the operating profit. Okay, if you carry out this regression between, again, delta asset value, the Y of the regression line, delta asset value or delta operating profit is equal to the intercept plus the slope coefficient multiplied by the regressor, which is, in this case, the delta interest rate. Okay? If you do this calculation, the slope coefficient of your regression line, the beta, it can be demonstrated that it is a measure, an estimate of the maturity of the assets. Okay? As it's written here. A measure of when on average the cash flows of the assets can due, which means a measure of the average maturity of the assets. Okay? What are the plus and the minuses of this approach? The major plus is that it's simple. You don't need to be. It's not a sophisticated calculation. You can do it quite easily, and it's also very robust from a theoretical standpoint. However, it also suffers of two major drawbacks. The first one, I already mentioned it before, if the company is not listed, you cannot use the asset value. You don't have it. But you still have the operating profit, because the operating profit is in the income statement, you have it. If you have the income statement, you have the operating profit. Second important drawback, technical drawback, is the fact that in order to carry out significant regression, you need to have a certain number of years, a certain number of periods, an adequate historical time series of the delta operating profit and the delta interest rate changes. Now, it's not a major problem, it's not a problem at all with the interest rate, because we have infinite time series of interest rates, so it's not an issue. But actually, with the operating profit, you may have a problem. Why? Because you do not necessarily have a long time series of the operating profit for the same company. Because the company could be a startup, because the company has reason to restructure itself, because you simply don't have the balance sheets available and income statements available. The number of possible reasons that could be used for justifying the absence, the fact that you miss an adequate number of operating profits is really unlimited. Okay? That's what I believe is the most important limitation. The advocates of this approach would suggest they are aware of these limitations, first. And one thing that they use as an escamotage for overcoming this problem, sometimes they suggest to use operating profit, the average delta operating profit of the industry to which the company belongs, which is it's one solution, but could be debated, because the company could be radically different from the rest of the industry. So we're rather confused, right? So that's alternative number one. Let's say the regression alternative. Okay. Alternative number two, much more humble, much more with the feet on the ground. Let's call it, although it's not called this way by the slide, let's call it the accounting solution. An approximation of the duration of the assets can be obtained by dividing what? By dividing the total value of the assets by what? By the annual depreciation and amortization, and then computing a weighted average of the results obtained. So this is absolutely, probably even more intuitive than the previous approach. The idea is that, suppose, let me put it this way, let me oversimplify. Suppose that the company has only one asset. Okay, and this one asset is represented by a plant, and the company doesn't control anything else. And this plant has been bought in the past, or whatever, written in our statements for 10 million euros. Okay, and there's nothing else for simplicity in our balance sheet. We want to know what is the average maturity of this plant. If you think about it, one possibility could be to divide these 10 million euros that we've paid for purchasing the plant, or building the plant, or whatever, by the annual depreciation of the plant. So if the annual depreciation is 1 million, suppose, it means that the average maturity of this plant is 10 years. Very simple. If the annual depreciation of the same plant, rather than being 1 million euros, is 500,000 euros, it means that we do expect that this plant is going to last and have an economic utility within our firm for 20 years. And so on and so forth. Now, the same principle that I've just mentioned concerning the simple statement of a simple firm with one asset in its balance sheet can be, needless to say, enlarged to a broader spectrum of possible assets. Okay? And here you see an example It's only an example applied to Telefonica. Telefonica is a telephone operator, Spanish one. Okay. What I did 4 years ago, I downloaded from the annual report of Telefonica the data that you see here. So, PPE, property, plant and equipment, the assets, you have it in the balance sheet. Then the long-term investment amount and other intangible assets, the number that you see there. And then I also downloaded from the income statement of Telefonica the depreciation and amortization. Okay. Now, it's an assumption, it's an estimate that must be taken with a pinch of salt. If you divide the total value of those assets by the annual depreciation amortization, which is the simplest version with which you can follow your goal of getting the asset maturity, 59 divided by 10, it would be, in this case, less than 6.7, but if you do it the simple way. If you do it on a weighted average, which is what is supposed to do here, weighted average, you get 6.7. In any case, no matter how you do it, simple one, total divided by depreciation, or weighted average by single categories of assets, which probably is more appropriate, you get an estimate, an accounting. You understand why accounting? Because these items, they come from the accounts. An accounting estimates of the average maturity of the assets. You may argue, and it is commented it's commented here, that the assets of the firm are not only represented by tangible assets, let's say long-term assets, or non-current assets, using the jargon of Professor Isabuso, non-current assets, tangible assets, but you may also argue correctly that the assets controlled by a firm are also current assets, right? Cash and cash equivalents, marketable securities, accruals and deferrals, inventories, trade payables, trade payables is wrong, trade receivables, and so on, tax credit. Shall we also consider that those assets in the overall maturity of our asset side of the balance sheet? The answer is, I think so, yes. And what can we do then in that case in order to consider this weighted average of maturities, the short-term or current assets? You make some assumptions. Cash has a maturity of 0. It's already cash. Inventories or credits, you could do an average of 1 year, for example, 6 months, and then you go ahead. You go ahead with the calculation, okay? Which means that this is it's absolutely an estimate, okay? But it's always better to make a reasonable estimate rather than guessing, okay? The other thing that you must consider is that these assets, well, it's a little bit offensive what I'm telling you, they do not have any corresponding depreciation and amortization, okay? In this example, for Telefonica, we have an average useful assets useful life of around 7 years, 6.8 years, which in turn, and it's an average of the 6 asset durations that you see reported in the bottom line of the table. Okay? That's another possibility that you may have. It's better to have in your toolbox more tools than an empty toolbox. Okay? There are other, this is the final slide. There are other, I wouldn't say marginal, additional considerations or comments on the rationale with which companies select the maturities of their firm or themselves. Three comments have been suggested here, which I believe are rather appropriate. The first one, by shortening the effective maturity of debt, you can help mitigating the conflicts of interest. What do I mean with that? I mean that all other things held equal, ceteris paribus, all other things held equal, if a company is forced or decides to go for a higher portion of short-term debt, it means that, presumably, this debt will be continuously or repeatedly renovated, right? Because it's short-term. You renew it whenever needed at the maturity of the the maturity. And this means that, linked to the fact that you need to renew this debt on a periodical basis, you also need to provide to creditors information on yourself every 2, 3 months, 1 month, 4 months, 6 months, which is a way that creditors have to monitor / control the behavior of firms. And you put it the other way around, observing the skepticism in your eyes. If you have, let's suppose that Antonio Salvi, which is myself, I do have 2 possibilities for financing myself for doing something. Okay. One is to have a credit line offered by a bank. Another one is to borrow money with a long-term loan. Okay, suppose that I have on the table these 2 alternatives. I mean, let alone the other comments that we could do on interest rate and blah blah, all the things that characterize each of the 2 alternatives. One comment should be also considered the fact that if I go for the long-term loan, I provide the data today of what I want to do, my annual income, if I'm buying an apartment, the value of the apartment, everything that is needed for getting the loan, the mortgage, okay? And then if I borrow with a loan of 20 years maturity, I tell you by experience, you at the bank have nothing to say. You don't see that. There's in my case, a monthly installment that you pay. You know it. It's not that the bank every 6 months calls you, Mr. Salvi, how do you do? What's going on? I mean, are you okay? Do you need anything? Or zero. There is no need to provide additional information. Imagine the opposite. A credit line. A credit line, if you have a credit line and you use it, you have a problem. If the bank is appropriately managed. What do I mean with that? You have a problem. It means that if you use a credit line, first of all, it's an expensive source of financing, but it's okay. But the other thing is that the bank, as you know, can discretionary call you to say, Mr. Salvi, you know what? Sconfinato, we say, you should re-enter into your physiological position because it's not that you have a credit line forever. Normally it's 6 months, 3 months, 9 months, 12 months. There's a maturity, short-term maturity with the credit lines. You use it, 3 months, you need to repay the money. Then you ask again for a new credit line, you need to start a new dossier. No, it's not big as the first one because a lot of information is already there, but the banks will ask you updated information correctly. And this is a way for the bank to monitor you. Also because with credit lines, normally banks do not have any additional guarantee. It's you and your borrowing capacity. With a loan, with a mortgage, you may say, well, at least you have the apartment. In case something goes wrong, take the apartment and see you bye-bye. But with the credit line, they have nothing, right? So they want to monitor you periodically, and this is a way for controlling the firm. Second, this is something I've seen yesterday, so we go rapid on that. Companies with high growth opportunities should have a higher percentage of short-term debt, since agency costs are higher for longer maturities. Which means that if you have growth options, you have a company growing rapidly because you have discovered very important things, you are promising an innovative startup company, okay? These companies, if they go for bank financing, normally they go, that's a certainty that I have. They are forced to go, more than they go, they are forced to go on short-term financing. Actually, the reason is absolutely in line with what I told you about the first bullet point. Because you are full of growth options. Okay, that's what you say. I am the creditor. I want to be cautious. I want to be prudent, right? And one way for me to be prudent is to reduce the maturity of debt. Whenever there is uncertainty about the future of a firm, creditors can protect themselves, among other possible tools, also by reducing the maturity of debt. Reducing the maturity of debt. Finally, a third factor, which also plays a rather important role, is the tax-based explanation. What do I mean with that? If short-term interest rates are smaller than long-term interest rates, it may be convenient for a company to go for long maturities in order to exploit the higher interest rate and the higher tax shield. Let me show you with a graph. Oh Lord. You see? Giusto? Esatto. Suppose that we put on a graph time and say for simplicity 6 months, 1 year, 10 years. Okay? And here the interest rates generically defined. Interest rates. Suppose that the so-called interest rate curve is something like, suppose that you have 1% here and 6% here. Suppose that this is something like this. So that in 10 years we get a 6% interest rate, and 6 months or 1 year, whatever, we get 1% interest rate. Okay? According to the tax-based explanation, since the interest expenses can be tax deductible, remember the tax you did that from a couple of days ago? Okay. You're gonna exploit a higher tax advantage here, positioning yourself here than here. So you would be more incentivized to go for long-term maturities. Okay? However, you may argue, and I agree with you, theoretically I agree with you, that okay, it is true that you get a higher tax advantage, but it is also true that you're also paying a higher interest rate. So you win on one side, but you lose on the other side. Correct? Correct up to a certain point. Actually, it is not correct because it's not that you're paying more. I don't know, I think that Professor Giorgino probably, he has classes here.
Yeah.
Okay. The implicit forward rate curve is called. Basically, the idea is that if you have a 6% here long term, it means that from now on till the end of 10 years, it's going to be 6 years. But the fact that it's positively sloped, it means that on average you will pay 6% per year from now on. But actually, interest rates which are low now, then in the long run, It's going to be more than 6% in the long run, so that the average gets 6%. The temptation of all of us would be the following, to say the following. Say, ma chi me lo fa fare? No? Why should I go for long-term interest rates if I pay 6% vis-a-vis 1% today with 6 months? I would go for short-term borrowing. That's 99% of people would think exactly that. Why? Because I pay 1%. Why should I pay 6%? Right, Francesca? Correct. Correct. Well, actually, seems intuitively correct, but actually, if huge like the Mole Antonelliana, if the expectations of markets are correct, it's a misconception. Why? Because the idea is that you look like the furbo della situazione and you get 1%. The stupid guy goes long and pays 6%. But there is a difference. So it seems to be stupid. But actually there is a major difference between the two. That this one pays 1% for 6 months, and then 6 months and 1 day you need to refinance. Not to normally. You need to refinance. And you don't know at which interest rate you will refinance your position. This one has locked in the interest rate for 10 years at 6%. This one suffers a so-called refinancing risk and interest rate risk. Refinancing means that in 6 months you will face two risks. The first one, you don't know if the banks will give you the money again. And secondly, you don't know at which rate they're going to give you the money in 6 months, right? But the most important and implicit thing in what we're saying here is that in order to get the 6% long-term interest rate, this interest rate here, 1%, must increase over the years. They're expected to increase more rapid at a higher level than 6%. So that the average between the low interest rate that you're paying now and the very high interest rates that you're paying in later years will give you 6%. There's no arbitrage. It's called arbitrage between the two possibilities. Either you go short and you get on your shoulders interest rate risk and refinancing risk, or you go long, you fix the interest rate, but needless to say, you suffer the problem of paying a higher interest rates now. But you pay a higher interest rates now that is compensated by the fact that it's counterbalanced by the fact that the others will pay your interest rate, if markets are correct, the expectations are correct, will pay a higher interest rate than 6% later on. Poi, quindi hai un'espressione diversa da quella bizantina con cui mi guardi normalmente?
In che senso?
Inquieti,
Io?
ti giuro.
Cosa?
Non ho mai capito se...
Mi sguardo d'assassino.
Sì, esatto. Proprio così. Hai visto la serie TV Malta? Su Netflix? Tu sei Miguel. Assassino, ovviamente. E io sono Marta.
Sono passato da...
Sto scherzando.
dal Capone.
Al Capone, anche vero, al Capone. È inquietante questo strano ragazzi, lo adoro. Mi piacciono le persone un po' inquietanti. Dimmi.
The interest rate goes up just because of the short-term interest rate goes up just because of...
No. Ricordami il nome, quello vero? Claudio. C'è anche Claudia, dove è Claudia? Lì. Voglio ricordarmi il nome. Corinne, Tan, Francesca, Angela. Mi sono dimenticato il tuo? No, quindi non me l'hai mai detto. Vedi, sto cercando di tenere come siete il mio sudoku. Ci vediamo alle 15:30? Non tardare, ok? Se non mi preoccupo chiamo a casa. what this line is a curve actually, is telling us is that the market today expects the short-term, pay attention, the short-term interest rates in the long run to be higher than 6%. If this is the curve that you see on the Sole 24 Ore, literally, the market, what you're seeing is that today the interest rates short-term are 1%. And what happens in the long run? 6%. But the long run now will be the short run in 10 years. I don't know how to say. Capito, Claudio? And what this curve is telling you is called implicit forward rate. Don't get me elaborate too much. Is that behind this number here means that the short-term interest rates in year 10 will be much higher than 6 in order to get an average for the 6% over 10 years to be, an average over 10 years to be 6%.
So you're not.
Bravo, it's like saying you're saving today but you're paying a higher interest rate later. That's it. While I'm positioning myself on an average. Ecco. Hai fatto bene a chiederlo, grazie. No, it's clearer now. And this is something that, how can I say that? I wouldn't say nobody knows. It's something that a lot of people ignore or they don't consider. They know, oh, I am the smart guy. I'll borrow 6% in the long run, right? Because I am the smart guy. I want to pay 1%. Bravo. It makes sense. It's okay. But you're not smarter than the others. On average, it's a strong assumption. You're going to pay higher later. So it's up to you. È vero che per pagare per morire c'è sempre tempo, però si dice, no? Però there is no free lunch. Actually, the real assumption here is that we do expect this works the way I told you if markets are efficient and the expectations turn out to be correct. If a COVID is in the middle here, then the situation can change dramatically. Positively or negatively, depends. Okay? The Serbian lady in the final row, are you okay? Can you remind me your name? Alexandra, vero? You were not there this morning? Lui c'era.
So if expectations are not correct, it's more convenient to go for the...
It depends. Depends. Quello che ho appena detto. Depends if they're not correct, it means that they are optimistic or pessimistic. Who can tell? Don't bet on these things. Don't bet on these things. If I may suggest as a friend in this case. A lot of people, managers, they bet on the future evolution of interest rates. It's dangerous. Especially if it is not your money. Don't bet with other people's money. It's ethically wrong. And in some cases you may fall in a cemetery. If the person of which you have lost the money incazzosa. And there are a lot of cases in which this, what I told you, has occurred. Not the cemeteries, I mean, but the bets with other people's money. It's easy to do that, but it's not that correct. Okay? You have questions? Okay. So, sorry, final word on that, because then I need to switch and go back. So the idea is that there could be somebody that says, you know what, knowing what we have said, I prefer to position myself from now on the 6%, and that's it. Because I avoid all the risks you were mentioning before. That could be an opportunity, but also risk. And on top of that, I start from today to get 6% interest rate that can be tax deductible. Okay? Needless to say, if the curve is the opposite, it may happen. If the curve is opposite, it was this way some years ago. If the curve is the opposite, it is better for you to position, in terms of tax advantage, to position yourself here. Okay. Molto bene. Lo switch. Ok. Continua. Great. Okay, so this is about the maturity structure of. Cazzo, ho scritto su. Non c'è il foglio, solo qua il foglio. Spegniamo. Sono i telefoni.
Per quello che non si vede.
Oh my god.
Try and one. Sto sudando. No, come liscia questa veramente. Un disastro sono. Vabbè, no, we can't use any more of this one now, that's the problem. My dear beloved friends, what time is it? Just 3 o'clock, we have time. My dear beloved friends, what we have to do now is to move to this. So we said about the maturity. Now we need to move to the fixed versus floating rate decision. The second one that was mentioned in this slide here. Basic structure, that means the decision between fixed versus floating. Now, should we go for floating rate debt, the short-term debt that we were mentioning before, this incredible mistake that I made, or should we go long-term? Or should we go fixed rate? Let me go directly to the second bullet point, which seems to be now more important than the first one, because the first one has already been commented. Because as I told you before, whenever there is some uncertainty about the future investments and duration investments, it's better to go short and or floating rate. Let me just write it down, although you wouldn't, what I'm saying probably would require a couple of hours of explanation, but probably Giorgino will tell you about that. When a debt is floating rate, the maturity of debt, it can be demonstrated, it's called duration. The duration of debt is equal to the time to maturity of next resetting of the coupon. Let me rephrase. Let me exaggerate. Suppose that I have a loan. This is what I'm telling you is not intuitive. Huh? Let's suppose that I have a 10-year loan. 10 years loan. 10-year maturity loan. Floating rate. Variable rate. Floating means variable rate. And this rate is reviewed every 6 months, suppose. The maturity is wrong. The duration of my debt is 6 months. It's not 10 years, it's 6 months. It can be demonstrated mathematically that the duration of a generic debt variable rate is equal to the time remaining to the resetting of the interest rate. Francesco, tutto bene? Okay, so a floating rate debt is. Tan could ask now to Antonio. Antonio, may I ask you a question? Sure. Well, more than a question, can I qualify what you just said in order to see if I understood it correctly or not? Have you just said that either you have a short-term debt or a long-term debt, floating rate interest rates, floating interest rate, scusate il pomeriggio è sempre drammatico, they are de facto, they have very similar durations? Yes, exactly what I said. Okay. So, it means that this implies in turn, step number one, bullet point number one, that the duration of future investments should be lower if there is a high uncertainty about the firm, and should be lower means that you should go for floating rate debt. But that's a little bit philosophical. I like much more bullet point number two, because it's more intuitive and more pragmatic. It's rather interesting, I believe. What is the idea behind how to set the decision between fixed and floating by looking at bullet point number 2? We should examine the covariance, the correlation, if you prefer, between the inflation rate and the cash flows of the firm. Cash flows that can be approximated by the operating profit. It's a proxy, okay? When operating profit or income has a positive correlation or covariance with the inflation rate, the company could afford having some floating rate debt. And the stronger the covariance, the higher the percentage of floating rate debt that the company may afford having. Okay? What is the idea? It's a little bit, because what I'm saying now goes a little bit to economics 101. Okay? I'm sure that my colleague of economics, macroeconomics, has told you that there is wide consensus, huge, overwhelming consensus on the fact that this goes back to Irving Fisher, 1908, A Theory of Interest, beautiful book that you can find on Amazon, according to which the nominal interest rate, that you have in a country is this, roughly speaking, the sum of two things. A real interest rate plus the inflation. He or she told you. This thing was firstly said by, actually it was Richard Cantillon during the 18th century, but Irving Fisher wrote a book about 500 pages on this specific. And it's also, if you want to blame somebody about these boring studies of finance, before Franco Modigliani and Umberto Mittler, there is another guy that you should absolutely hate, Irving Fisher. Because Irving Fisher, among the other things, including the one that I've just mentioned, was also the inventor of the discounted cash flow. The NPV, he's the guy. So if you hate finance, and you hate these things, you have to choose 3 names that you must hate. Irving Fisher, Franco Modigliani, another guy that, and Merton Miller. Okay? Just if you want to find the culprits, these are the culprits. There are others, needless to say, all of them. But these ones are, they rank first, I would say. So let's go back to what I was saying before. The nominal interest rate, I hope I said more or less the same thing that my colleague has said to you somewhere else. Nominal interest rate is the sum of 2 things. The real interest rate and an inflation rate. Okay? But let's go back to bullet point number 2. So if there is a covariance between the operating profit of the firm and the inflation rate, okay, it means that when the inflation rate goes up, the operating profit goes up. When the inflation rate goes down, the operating profit, there is a positive covariance, right? But the inflation rate is one of the key components of the interest rate, right? I just told you that. So it means that there is a positive covariance between the operating profit and the interest rate. The real interest rate is rather stable. He told you, I'm sure. Inflation rate is more volatile. So if there is a positive covariance between the operating profit and the inflation rate, it means de facto that there is a positive covariance between the operating profit and the interest rate. And if there is a positive covariance, and there is always a corridor between the operating profit and the interest rate, you can afford having some floating rate debt because it's always under control. Because there's always a harmony between the dynamics of the 2 things. You can afford having. I really would like to show you, but I cannot. Senti Francesco, volevo chiederti una piccola cortesia.
Altra carta.
No, aspetta. Dovresti andare a qualche parte, sorry for the guys at home, and say, qualcuno deve aver scritto direttamente Scusa, è possibile pulire?
Vale.
Ma l'abbiamo trovato così e non riusciamo a scrivere. Spuntatevi fuori se volete la stessa grafia. So what I wanted to show you is with a very simple example, this principle, because sometimes you need an example that I hope opens your mind rather than a sophisticated economics principle. I'll show you that. Okay, so what you need to retain from this slide is bullet point number 2 that says, if you can experience, if you observe a positive covariance between the operating profit and the inflation rate, since the inflation rate is one key component of the interest rate, the company can afford having some floating rate debt in its capital structure. Okay? Well, let's go ahead to the third element, waiting for the guy opening the email, right? The third one is, where is it? Oh, here. The currency structure problem. Okay? The currency structure problem, guess what? It's always the same story. Right? Now we know the story. The story is, if there is some consistency between cash inflows and cash outflows, everybody lives happily. The principle at the end of the day is always the same, declined appropriately according to the various circumstances to which we apply. One circumstance is named here, the currency. Which currency should we finance ourselves? And the principle, the hedging principle, the matching principle, the serendipity principle says that, no, serendipity is wrong. Hedging principle, hedging, the other one is?
Matching.
Matching. Right, matching is the right word, sorry. The matching principle says, dear company X, if you have some cash flows denominated in a currency which is different from your functional currency, you should have the same proportion of cash outflows, it means interest expenses, cash outflows denominated in the same currency. So if you have you are a European firm that prepares and works normally in Europe, but for various reasons you have 30% of revenues which are expressed in dollars. A good rule would say that you should finance yourself with 30% debt denominated in US dollars. Okay, it's a matching principle. Cash inflows with cash outflows. So that if the currency rate, why do you do that? Because if the currency rate evolves, if it evolves in a certain direction, it affects the same way the inflows and the outflows, so that you still will keep the corridor safe. Okay? And that's it. Now we're going to see an example applied to a company that is well known by all of us, whose name is Disney. This example is taken from Aswad Damodaran, that I'm sure you have heard about. No? Aswad Damodaran is a very famous finance professor. By the way. But before the example, I would like to show you if the guy arrives. It's a lady or a guy?
Guy, I think.
Accidenti.
Non lo dico. Era sul tetto, mi hanno detto.
Era sul tetto? Sta buttando giù questo libro. Well, let's go ahead with the example, then when he comes, I will come back to the, what time is it? 3:10, okay. Or you're tired, you want to have a break. Let's do it this way, if you agree with that. We're gonna clean, we're gonna finish the presentation. We're gonna see the example, which presumably, if you don't have strange questions and if Claudio doesn't kill me in the meanwhile, we will finish the presentation. Okay, then we're gonna have a break. Okay, after so that Niccolò comes back, he's gonna take over for the case. Everything makes more sense. Okay, so let me go ahead with the example. The example refers to Disney. I hope I don't have to present the Disney company to you. Everybody knows what we're talking about. But let me be a little bit more precise. According to the author, Damodaran, Aswad Damodaran, NYU professor of finance, was my professor when I was in New York. Basically, the businesses in which Disney operated, this is 2016, 5 years ago, still it's the same, operates are 5. Studio entertainment, movies, media networks, TV channels, Disney Channel, you know. If you have a brother or sister, or some of you may have a child, you know the Disney Channel does exist. You know the content. Third, parks, amusement parks, Euro Disney, Florida, Orlando, China. There are various amusement parks. Then there are consumer products, Disney stores, where they sell puppets and everything. And interactive, which is also it's a residual, trivial, negligible business. Okay? And each of these 5 businesses has its own characteristics. Right? Let me go straight to the point, without looking at the slide. And okay, let me go back. Movies, studio entertainment. Movies. It's a rhetorical question, Claudio. Okay, a rhetorical question. Do you think that movies, the movie business, is a business that is the asset side, not the movies? The movies over. The movie business, the assets are movies. Pellicola, yeah. Il mio carnevale. No. Do you think? No, la vivo male sta cosa. Do you think that movies is a short-term or a long-term business? I mean, the average duration of the assets you have is long-term or short-term?
Shorter.
Why? It's a guess. No.
No, because
Why, Claudio?
it doesn't take a lot of time and maybe it takes a lot of money, but it doesn't take a lot of time to make movies and the companies who make movies usually don't actually own everything that is necessary to make a movie. Like they rent a lot of stuff and they don't have a lot of fixed assets in their balance sheets.
Let me rephrase. Do you think that the average length of cash inflows coming from movies is short-term or long-term? It's a symphony to me. Che è un po' quello con la gara, però the standing is slightly different. When I say the asset duration means on average, what do you think is the cash inflow that, how long it's gonna last, the cash in that you get from movies? You correctly said shorter. I mean, there are some exceptions. Cinderella, okay, but the vast majority of movies, it's 6 months, what it is? 1 month, 3 months, 1 year, whatever it is, and then the movie vanishes, right? So, if that's the case, all other things are equal, Claudio. Grazie, chiedo scusa, ho fatto un casino. Il responsabile sono io.
Proviamo a provare.
Se no la riparto,
Come?
se no la ricompro.
Ah, per me io...
Lei si figura. Ci proviamo? Sposto questo così non fa senso. Vedo duro anch'io, sì. No.
Possiamo provare a sanitare?
No, funziona. Ignazio è un mago. Grazie, perché stavamo tutti in attenzione. Beh, mi sembra un ottimo risultato, dai. Come no? Un perfezionista. Ah sì, ah sì. Io vedo le ombre dappertutto, non solo qua, figurati un po'. Grazie infinite e auguro una splendida serata. Spero di non disturbarla più. Grazie. Ok, adesso we go back, facciamolo calmare. You said it right. So the movie, and if that's the case, should this business be financed with long-term debt or short-term debt?
Short-term debt.
So soddisfazione. Exactly. The matching between assets and liabilities. Molto bene, cari amici. Media networks, which means TV channels. Something simple, right? Peppa Pig, ok. Dolls, House, come si chiama quello che vede mio figlio? Manco mi ricordo. Well, Peppa Pig is an outlier. But the other cartoons that you have normally, what do they last? Nothing. Right? Which means, Claudio, that the average expected cash inflow from those cartoons is rather limited. Would you finance that business with short term or long term?
Short-term.
Third business, parks. Parks is another story, right? Parks are there to stay for a very long period. Should you finance the building of a park, the management of a park, mainly with short-term or long-term debt?
Long.
Bravissimi! You got it, guys. So, needless to say, what we have to do now is to first check what these. Well, these are single businesses, okay? But when a company finances itself, it finances as a whole, as a unicum, right? So we need to compute, let me say, weighted average maturity of the businesses. Antonio, yes, did you do it? I didn't. Damodara did it. Here it is. This is the table. First of all, I want to show you the final column, the weight. This column named weight says that almost 50% of the overall business of Disney is movies. Just to learn something more for the romantic dinner, no? I mean, you know what? TV channels, it's okay, but TV channels is okay, but you know, parks for Disney, they count 1/3 of the overall business. It's a lot. I thought it was less, frankly. But it's a lot, so they do care. So imagine the COVID, how much destroyed the activities of Disney, since it's 1/3, and for 1 year, whatever, you keep the parks all closed, you have a problem, right? It means that for 1 year, 1/3 of your revenues are missing. They're gone. Ciao, bye-bye. Okay? Media networks 50%, parks 1/3, then the remaining studio entertainment 13%, okay? It means TV channels. I'm sorry, the other way around. Media networks is TV channels, studio entertainment is movies, I'm sorry. And then you have, you see, consumer products and interactive, which are, they don't count. If you compute the regression approach, remember, for the maturity, operating profit, interest rates, for the 5 businesses, actually you can do it not necessarily on Disney, but as it's written here, you use the industry. You compute the sensitivity of the industry rather than only on Disney. You get the numbers that you see here, okay? You compute the weighted average of these numbers, weighted by what, Antonio? By these weights. These numbers weighted by these weights. And what you get is minus 4.34, which means that the average, the weighted average asset duration of Disney is around 4 years. 4.3 years. 4 years. We have a very interesting benchmark now for understanding and comparing the average asset duration of Disney with the average debt duration of Disney. Okay, and that's one point. Second point, inflation rate. Remember, inflation rate is useful in order to understand if the company should be floating rate debt, should have floating rate debt or fixed rate debt. And here it says that we have mixed evidence. You see here it's a plus, minus, 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 but here it's a plus. It's only one plus, so it means that there is a positive covariance between the media network, which is the TV channels, and the inflation rate. Okay. However, there is conflicting evidence. There's a plus, and a stream of minuses in the second column. Okay. But it is also true that there is an important plus, because that plus counts for 50% of the overall value of the firm, right? So we could be tempted to say that we would expect a significant amount of debt of Disney to be floating rate. Third and final evidence, third column, currency. You see that there is, again, something similar to the second one, a positive correlation with the media networks and a negative one with parks and resorts, which means that, but in general, the weighted average is negative, which means that the appreciation of the dollar, because the dollar is the function of currency, appreciation of the dollar has a negative impact on the value of Disney. And this in turn suggests us to diversify the currencies in which the company actually finances itself. You understand?
Does it mean that their operation works more abroad?
Absolutely. In fact, media networks, but also where is parks? The second one, the parks is the counts 1/3, as we said, are negatively affected. The parks located in Paris or in China, there are two important parks. The dynamics with the exchange rate with dollar may affect the number of tourists and visitors that you have. Although I must say that Americans, they do go to Paris, mainly for Paris. I don't know how to say. It's only an accident that they go to Euro Disney, because they have Los Angeles, they have Orlando in Florida. They don't need to go to Paris just for the amusement park. It's true. Have you ever been to Orlando? Seriously, man. If you like amusement parks, Orlando is your mecca. Oh my God. Euro Disney is okay, but for an American, it's okay. Very plain vanilla park. But even if you are in Italy, Gardaland, Leolandia, mica soltanto peggio di Euro Disney. Have you ever been there at least? No, okay. Euro Disney non siete stati? Ah, che carino. Bene. Ti ho portato a Ferragosto, mio figlio. Poverino. Sudavo come. A Ferragosto io ero a Euro Disney. Vabbè. So, what I told you before, that the maturity is around 4 years, so the liabilities should be around 4 years. There is a certain positive covariance between the inflation rate and the income statement and the operating profit of the company, so we could afford having some floating rate debt. And finally, we should also have some non-dollar denominated debt. Okay, let's see what actually Disney does. We are approaching the end, as promised. Perfetto, neanche gli svizzeri. So, the current capital, the actual situation of Disney at the time when the exercise was made by Professor Damodaran had 14.3 billion interest-bearing debt with a face value, weighted average maturity of 8 years. Okay? Allowing for the fact that the maturity of debt is higher than the duration, this is a technical issue. The contractual maturity tends to be higher than the duration. Trust me. So here he said, even if we consider that the actual duration is smaller than the contractual maturity of 8 years, we could say that probably there is room for Disney to reduce a little bit the average maturity of its debts, because we have 4 years asset side maturity vis-a-vis 8 years liability side maturity. There's a mismatch. Either there are two alternatives. Either you increase the duration of the assets or you decrease the duration of liabilities. It's much more easy by far to change the maturity of liabilities rather than the assets, because the assets is your business. What you do, what do you change? The parts are long term. A movie, the average life of a movie is around 2 years. You know that? The average life of a video game is 2 years. So it's not that this says no. From now on, the average life of a movie is 5 years. It's not you deciding; it's the market, no, that says if it's a success or not. On average, it's around 2 years, probably even less than 2 years. So first evidence is that one. Second one. Only 5.5% of the debt of Disney is expressed in non-US dollar, which seems to us a little bit too limited, right? Because the company is broadly operating abroad, and probably either because it is in Europe or in Southeast Asia, there could be the possibility of increasing this very small percentage of debt denominated in currencies different from the dollar, Indian rupees and Hong Kong dollars. Indian rupees and Hong Kong dollars are those they actually use. But if you are in Paris and you have a very important percentage of your revenues located in Europe and in euros, probably you should start also matching the cash inflows coming from Europe with the cash outflows coming denominated in euros, so that you hedge any exchange rate movement. Third, around 5.6% of its debt is floating rate. That's again, it's a rather minor percentage, only 5%. While we have seen that the positive correlation 1.41 over there with the inflation rate weights 50%, right? So probably intuitively we could argue that there is room for additional floating rate debt in the capital structure of Disney. You see, imagine that you are a financial advisor of Disney, okay? Because for Disney it means that you work for, I don't know, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Bain, and they say, do you think that we are appropriately financed or not, or the design, it's called the design of our debt should be changed? This kind of calculation is what they expect you to do. A little bit more sophisticated, more detailed, more accurate, but the idea is that one, huh? Nothing more, nothing less. What can Disney do in order to move from where it is to the optimal level of the optimal design of debt? It could swap some of the existing fixed rate with floating rate. Since our objective is to increase the percentage of floating rate debt, we could swap some fixed rate with floating rate debt. Or, and we could go progressively, we could design the things progressively. It's a matter of speed again. Progressive means that the new debt that we're going to raise for new projects should have more closely the features that we expect for our target design of debt. So the new debt will be expressed not in dollars, will be shorter maturity, and it will be partially floating rate debt. So that if we add these three characteristics on the already existing characteristics of debt of Disney, they will dilute these problems that we have suggested so far. So okay? You won't believe it, but we have finished the second set of slides, my dear friends. It's time for, first and foremost, a coffee break. And secondly, to hand you over to Niccolo Nirino, that in the meanwhile I hope he will show up. And we will start working on the Diageo case. Enjoy the coffee break.
Dai.
The breaking point, the look for appreciation. Exactly. The others.
走。这边开始上课，我可能就得准备走。
Sì, sì, andiamo avanti.
我直接从这儿拿了一个就跑过去。爸。
你在课上怎么？
我起早了没地待呀。
几点了？
现在才37，我4点多就来了。这儿现在。
走啊！
坐那儿。
不，他们对于上课了，没到就在这儿学习。我怕马上就走，要不然就挂这里，
这不是我可以走了吗？我想说，我直接就坐在那儿，这样一走我就直接好走了，站着，因为我还得让那个条子站起来。
要不你坐旁边也行。
现在还得让你站着一样。
不行，感觉
没来得及。去吧。
这个来跟我拿。 Prendono già.
Però gli anticipo le presentazioni, io fosse 15 quando c'era l'esame. Quando sono andato via, non pensavo che fosse prima dell'esame. Andiamo, poi c'è. Sono arrivato di cosa, ho fatto tutto, sono andato in albergo.
Leopoli.
Mi costa di più andare da Torino all'aeroporto.
Adesso devo stare in
Perché lui voleva, non aveva più
Ma sei della cosa assurda che abbiamo fatto? Fatto la televisione e la presenziale. Quelli prima di noi avevano la presentazione di una con 50.000 robe troppa roba. Sì, quindi è proprio che schifo.
5, 7, 3, 6.
Non è che vedo solo perché sabato sera che c'è un ricordo non c'ho non si vede a casa e siamo anche mai pazzi. Perché vabbè, lì c'è
Comunque non puoi dire da quando sono perché adesso controllato sono di tutti. Ci sono. Io ce la mandi buona. C'è qualcosa su
questo è perché quest'anno con degli altri. Sì. No, uno non so. È nostro.
Mettiamo gli altri. Well, I would suggest to quindi prima lo presento slide So, guys, while waiting for the others to join us again, as I told you, I wanted to give this opportunity to Nicolò, although I and Francesco will be here, to present this case with Diageo, to work on the case together with you and to debrief it with you. This is a case basically about the trade-off model, okay? In the application, internal application of the trade-off model to Diageo, okay? I think it is an interesting one, and I'm sure that Nicolò can make an amazing job. So I hand you over to him directly without sitting over there, just not to disturb you. In case you have questions and he cannot answer, I'll be there. Okay. But this is not going to happen because he's an outstanding guy.
I hope. Thank you, Professor, for the floor. So, guys, I recognize some of you from lesson that I had with Professor Giorgini, who, okay, and other guys that didn't arrive yet. So, today we are talking about Diageo. You have the case on Moodle, I think that would be useful to work in small group. You read the case, I show you some questions, and then after 50 minutes or 45 minutes, we start with a discussion. Because I'm not going to give you a speech, because in 1 year probably you have the interview for the job. So when someone asks you something, they deserve an answer. So this is the plan. Also, from home you have to work individually. And you know Diageo? Have you ever heard something about Diageo? Diageo is a big company.
Nicola,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you. Probably a good idea would be to show them directly on the internet the website of
Yeah.
the company, because you can immediately understand what we
I recognize Diageo.
You will see the smile in their eyes. Eccoli qua, finalmente. Calma, calma correre.
This is the website of Diageo, and it's famous because its business is about alcohol. Today is Friday, so we are in the good mood to...
Sorry. Because, just 1 second. You go here, our brands, and you need to enter the 9th of August 1969, which is when he was born. Okay. Our brands, Brand Explorer, let's see. These are the, this. You know this company. Hai visto?
Guinness.
Take a look.
Tanqueray, Guinness.
No, it's not the end of the story. These are Scotch whiskey. These are, if you love whiskey, these are the.
Oh, they are young. Maybe whiskey.
Oh,
Whiskey is okay. I don't drink whiskey usually.
Olban, Talisker, Olban, Caligula. Right, these are very good brands, obviously. Yeah? Then you have, we're talking for our Eastern European country friends. Vodka. History. Other whiskey, rum, Zacapa, Ampero, Bundaberg, liqueur, Baileys, Sheridan's, tequila, Julio, gin, Tanqueray, Gordon's, Gilbert. These are probably the most well-known brands. Not necessarily the quality is the highest, but for sure these are among the top brands in the world in this respect. That's what we're talking about. This is the #1 producer of alcoholic beverages in the world. Sorry for that.
No, thank you. So guys, we are talking about Diageo. So we can start to read the case. Small group. I give you 15 minutes. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer it. Done. Okay?
Robert, you should show us the questions, Nicola. Mr. Mirino. Oh.
This is like the questions that we will discuss in 50 minutes. Do you know where the case is? Okay.
think we should get this.
Che ti faccio?
How should we?
So are we looking for the directions to answer
Two-person group. If two-person group, we can be like just two. But should we ask how many people?
Oh, I don't think it will be okay.
Is it okay? Okay. I'll
If you want to join, you can ask.
I'm okay. Ragazzi, facciamo insieme oppure separati? Una persona o quattro? Così anche io.
Ma se non credo che
Quanto piccolino?
perfetto. Sì, ha detto che doveva uscire, quindi.
Ah, ok.
Deve fare il vaccino.
Ah, ok.
Okay. Critical model is the model capture damage. Nature of capital structure going Do you understand the number?
Not really, but we'll ask questions.
Yeah. I didn't think I understood.
You will give us some information about it.
Okay. Can I just pick
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I'm just looking at the balance sheet to see.
It's in the favorite bit page. They just explain I think the first part.
This is comparing with other.
This one, I think it's balance sheet. But it's different.
Yeah, because it's by years. I think this part is
Like Planet, Genius.
Grand Mats, Guinness and Digeo are really different.
Yeah, so no, it's brand of them. I think it's all brands.
No,
Yes.
because they bought Guinness. Can I ask one question? We have the data for Guinness. It was before they acquired it, or it's
For the manager.
okay.
But I'm not talking about.
Yeah. No, I was just wondering why they were separated.
Yeah, we have the balance sheet, it's inside, so should we include it just with the
I
whole?
suggest you to read the case. Okay. Not to look into the balance sheet and try to answer the question.
Okay.
Okay. What they report in the text in the case, then you can elaborate the discussion.
Okay.
can move if you want. You can move if you want.
Very done with you.
Is India also GS and when Metropolitan is all his friend. It's all Diego's friend.
Yes, yes, yes. Because they merged, and then Diageo was born.
So this time, I think that to finance themselves, like means equities,
Yes.
so they are in this part. So they have to issue more, acquire more debt.
Yes, I don't know, it depends because I think it's, this is the historical part, so maybe something changed afterwards.
The major is still A plus.
Yes.
So then
They have like, they were probably both under leverage, and when they merged, they,
still
yeah, geo is short term and it has a maturity of 6 to 1 year, 6 months to 1 year.
If they go to BBB, they will have much difficulty to raise this kind of.
They're not clear because, for example, bank rate cost, the more tricky one are the ones that are indirect, and so they're difficult to grasp and probably to quantify. Yeah, but you have to multiply it by the total to get like the coverage you get.
we should highlight something. I think we should highlight something in case we forget.
Huh?
In case we forget.
Okay, so
No, it's okay. I mean, just
to
like,
highlight it.
yeah. Do you think it's helpful? I think I can find it. Just like something you can find.
Okay, so
I think this one. This is going to be
regional.
financial with interest coverage rate discussion. Do you remember there's something in this in the previous? Should we highlight it? Or
Yeah. But
should we? After?
yeah, because
For
I'm gonna lose the.
Yeah, exactly.
You say they are with vehicles we've seen, they are way more equified and stuff, but we also have to highlight the debt they have are for the most short term, and this can impact the interest rates.
But do you think it's correct because they sell alcohol? It's short term, so they should acquire more short term, like to be
Yeah, it is. I think it's appropriate because they're matching the
assets.
assets.
I think it's okay, but like they are more unleveraged. Do you think? Unleveraged.
I don't know. I would like to see what were the results of the analysis they made.
I think there isn't.
There is.
It's just a question, like not us to analyze now. If you are a financial advisor, what you should advise to the company.
Just a second. I'm just looking at what kind of data is this. Okay.
It's all. So we know from the situation they are unlevered and with us like they are short-term finance debt, but there's not enough debt unlevered. So they can go to the optimal level to go a little bit down, acquire more debt. Probably. How do you think?
If we apply the trade-off theory, of course, because the trade-off theory is the one who made the practitioners who say that, of course, if you are under-levered, you can still operate because that's the demonstration you can exist as an under-levered company, but at the same time you're actually paying more money and having so much equity in your capital structure. Usually.
So do you see that there is one thing that the financial manager there in this company, they want to keep someone to last period.
Yeah, because they want to.
What did they say? I forget. Here. Because he unable to meet expectation of the equity holders. So do you think instead of acquiring more debt, they should pay more dividend so the equity will be smaller? And the debt, the percentage will be bigger, and they will go to the optimal. Another alternative.
So you're thinking if they're not taking more debt, just pay more dividend to balance the debt to equity ratio. Yeah, it makes sense because you're not increasing the debt, but you're decreasing the.
And also, he have the worry to, like, not. Like if you acquire more debt, it's more dangerous. Like you're feeling
even
more.
From an external point of view.
Yeah. So I think.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. What is the problem? I don't know.
About that.
Right hand side of balance sheet we have already said it, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, please a lot.
Do you think we should advise?
Right? Yeah.
I don't know.
We should, of course,
Okay.
we should.
So
The company is underlevered. The jail.
they are operating.
Before we pass to the trade of theory, what what optimal sequence of topology you would like to resolve to
The Jalase
the
using
distance
sine.
on consideration of using the sine
Okay, so I would say like using the trade-off theory, the thing we said before is that they should have a bigger percentage of debt, which means not just taking on more debt, but in the case you told
reduce the equity
reduce the increase reduce the equity by the dividend policy, for example, something else. And for the second part, I would say that of course it's not the only consideration, because although they recognize they in some way need to take on more debt, they are still worried about having too much debt and not being able to meet the expectation of the bondholders and their debtors. So this one will be longer.
They want to get a higher percentage of that.
The optimal
Should we say one with more that proportion in the whole structure?
With a higher percentage of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because if you say more that, like, there can be no change.
Yeah. You mean not more debt by by a nominal point of view, but by more.
Guys, regarding question number 4, focus on the output of Monte Carlo simulation, not the input. Okay?
Okay.
The output.
It's a lot of that.
Yeah, we'll look at the with a bigger percentage. The optimal point.
Here's another thing they kept extra cash. 1 billion for something.
Sorry?
Here's another thing they keep extra cash. Here's another reason.
Yeah, because looks like they're working at a level where they always considering mergers and acquisitions. So they should have extra cash at hand if some opportunity arises.
Obligations of bondholders and former acquisition.
How do you write that?
ACQUI. Yes. Business.
Third one is easily
Because they want to concentrate on one
yeah.
want to concentrate on
Vabbè, senza aggiungere pressioni. Ok.
They cut costs.
personal data advertising with treasury growth recommends ideas of little companies forward.
Okay, I think now we should look at the data. These are the financial statements.
Guys, 5 minutes and we start the discussion.
This is the year or something. It's the TV subsidiary. I'm not sure. Is that the group Oh dear.
This one is the
Branch.
branches, and this one is the total for 97. Then I suppose merger happens, so they are just
Here.
and they are looking
Decrease a bit and increase. Decrease. Dividends is decreased, so they didn't give a lot of dividends.
I suppose no, but there is this part here, which I think is crucial. It looks like we were wrong. During more liabilities than equity, and when they combine, look at total liabilities over the total equity. They would have
Or it's just the estimation, it's not like exact. I don't know.
Perché parte di lì? Perché parte di lì?
Sì, sempre.
Interest coverage ratio.
L'importante è che non facciano storie troppo. Poi mi ricordavo un'altra volta.
Succede precisi.
Non sono così cristalli. Va bene, facciamo.
I thought it's like increasing. Now they are mature. When they are not mature, they become normal. And this seriously increased in Oh, they have more dollar currency. Is there any currency changing like in United Kingdom? Or they should change the currency? We can suggest that they may be wrong. I think that the five question, maybe they're choosing the path is wrong. The fifth question meaning that maybe they suggest they use a method that is wrong, so we should correct.
Yeah, but why would it be wrong?
Because they're, I'm not sure if this means that it's the year, like we said. Like they are reducing their liability actions, right? If this is
Guys, do you need more time?
are reducing actions over the years, it's wrong because they have increased the
minutes.
Actually, what they have done is over the years they have reduced their liability, and equity is increasing, is more or less the same. So it means they are worse, they are going upward, like even in that direction. That percentage is even smaller now if they do this.
So you say that they are decreasing that in the years?
So the percentage on the right side of balance sheet is even smaller. They are even going upward. So actually they have to reduce that. So I think that if the fifth question is meaning that if we should like tell them something like this is we said that they should increase the percentage of that no matter what, you should reduce this part, remain this part unchanged or increase it.
Okay, because they okay, so let's modify it first one.
Yeah.
Guys,
They're unlevel.
let's start the discussion.
We're not sure we're right or wrong. Let's try our best.
Just to say, because it's not nice to interrupt. You're gonna have the discussion with Nicolò, so I prefer not attending because no, it's gonna be amazing presenter. I hope that I will see you. Well, first of all, let me wish good luck for those of you who are sitting for the Monday retake exam. Okay, it's gonna be fun. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. Then we're gonna meet again on Wednesday, where let me reinforce the concept. We're gonna basically examine the convertible bonds, subordinated and hybrid securities with the promo desk case. So that my part of the course will be over. Then from Thursday on, you will have these 14 hours with Professor Almeida that I will be also joining as much as possible, because it's surely something that I can learn from you. Okay, so let me wish you an excellent weekend for those that are not expected to study excessively. And wish you also good luck with the presentation of Nicolò. And thank you very much, Nicolò, for offering me the opportunity to take me a little bit early. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Ciao.
Sta felice?
Sono felice. Ciao, felice.
So guys, let's start. Question number 1. How's Diageo been managing the right-hand side of balance sheet? I know that some of you have some trouble. Try to answer this question. Someone will start by also from home. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Please. Because when you will be on JP Morgan interview and they ask you something,
They started. Can I?
Yeah.
Basically, I remember well. They started when because Diageo is a merger, born as a merger company. At the beginning, they had 42% of equity finance, and after the merging, they increased the debt finance. So they're going to have less equity debt and more external.
they wonder if it would be a good idea to increase the debt. Okay?
Yes.
B.
But not using equity from shareholders, but from external, let's say.
Okay, this case is focused a lot on the debt part. I think that I read this case and the authors never mention, no, maybe they mention equity, but they focus more on debt. And regarding the debt, what is short-term debt? Okay. But what is spicy when you talk about debt? The interest rate come from what?
Long.
Yeah? From rating. From credit rating. You know Standard & Poor's, Moody's. They judge you as a creditor. So, talk a little bit about the rating of Diageo.
The rating was A+.
A+. Do you think it's a good or bad rating?
Quite good.
Quite good. I agree with you. And what are the benefits of this rating?
They can acquire more commercial paper more easily.
Yeah, the case mentioned two things. The one is they can borrow
More money.
more money
At lower interest rates.
at the same interest rate, and they can enter the market of commercial paper. That the corporation with rating below BBB They are not allowed to enter that market. So seems a good company under this point of view. But how they manage the debt? Okay, but what they look at when they have to take a decision regarding the debt? Also, the rating is based cash flow is important, but there is a ratio that both them, I mean Diageo and Standard & Poor's, Moody's, look. Interest coverage ratio, EBITDA divided by interest expense, and EBITDA divided by total debt. So, I don't want to see it, guys. You forgot to mention the target of the interest coverage ratio. It is around 5 and 8. Now a really good question. Is it good or not? The higher, the better, usually, yes. Is higher or is low?
High.
We know that the rating is A+. So it's a good ratio, probably. But if I be the CFO of Diageo, I also want to see what my competitors usually do. Someone of you look at the competitor? Table 4 of the case. Let me show you table 4 of the case. Table 4 of the case show us Diageo ratios, market capitalization, market book ratio, enterprise value EBIT, interest coverage, that ratio, ROA, credit rating, beta, ROA, etc. etc. Let's talk about interest coverage ratio. Diageo has an interest coverage ratio equal to 5. The competitors.
Looks like every competitor that has a higher interest cover ratio has
So
even a better
perfect.
rating.
The competitors have higher interest coverage ratio. It seems that the debt policy of Diageo is very aggressive. No? If someone has a doubt about this thing? No. Okay. And you are right. See, the Diageo has a debt policy very aggressive. Also, if we consider EBITDA divided by total debt. Same thing. 54%, alcohol companies 35 and 40. 60, 40, 140, 59. Okay. Exhibit 4 show the same thing. And also for the company, Diageo seems with a lower interest coverage ratio. So maybe it's riskier But I have a question. Diageo. Can you compare Diageo with restaurant firm or consumer? Gillette sell something to show a lot of birds, but maybe alcohol and beer are better competitors. Do you think it's right or not to compare Diageo, before the spin-off of Burger King and the sale of the other company that I don't remember the name, but you know, Pittsburgh, come si chiama? Do you think that compare Diageo with alcohol and beer is right? Or we are still missing something? Your colleague, you say a very smart thing. Diageo is a big corporation with a lot of business. Okay, maybe the right competitor that we have to look at is Seagram. Also the case mentioned Seagram. Non so nemmeno come si pronuncia, but this one. And if we look the interest coverage ratio of Seagram and EBITDA total debt, Diageo have a better policy.
Why should we compare with that?
Nice question. Your colleague asked me why not Unilever.
Because maybe their business units are not like comparable with
The business unit of Unilever probably are different from the business unit of Diageo. Why? Seagram?
because
It's like really comparable. And now that we know that compare Diageo with Seagram is the right move as a CFO. What do you think about the debt policy? Is aggressive or is defensive?
compared to them it's defensive because they have a higher coverage.
It's defensive. So we have a good opportunity maybe. We can raise the debt. I will upload these little slides for you. Okay, I think it's fair. B is the first answer regarding the competitors when we consider all the companies of table number 4. C mention the fact that it is not correct. Finally, answer D. The correct comparison to make is between Diageo and competitors who are also in the same multiple lines of business as Diageo. Exhibit 4. In Exhibit 4, you will find the right answer of this first question. It's hard, guys, or not? But this case is good because when you will work in some company and you will work with the CFO, you will do these things. And to do these things, you have to know the theory. Don't be scared about theory. Because a lot of students think that minchia che palle, ma devo studiare sta roba. No. Let's move on. Question number 2 that I will read from my notes. If one applies the static trade-off theory di Ageo, what optimal capital structure policy will likely result? And does this seem to be the only consideration that Diageo is using in deciding optimal capital structure? You try to answer this question. I solve. And I think that the starting point had to be think about theory. What Modigliani and Miller says on the first proposition, who cares about if I finance my company with debt or with equity? Who cares? It's irrelevant. Proposition number 2 say, give me debt, that my value will increase a lot. Thank you, the tax shield. The trade-off theory say that we have to put another variable in our model. Which variable? Not taxes. Financial distress. So, question number 2, which is the starting point. Understand which is the tax shield of the company. You don't have to calculate almost anything in this case. The only thing on the process. Okay. Which is the tax shield of Diageo? I know that you know because it's written in the case. 27%. Okay? So for every euro that you pay in interest, 27 cents go on the pocket of the shareholder. The second variable that we need to know to apply the trade-off model is, your colleague already said,
Financial distress.
the financial distress, the cost to be in financial distress situation. And now I have another question. Are you able to, maybe this is the only calculation that we had to do during the previous 40 minutes. Are you able to estimate the cost, this cost, the amount? You have to multiply something and something else. Let's start.
Return debt multiplied by their debt and
Sorry, but I cannot hear you.
return on debt. Return on debt
Return on that. Yeah.
multiplied by their percentage of debt plus return
It's
on
way more complicated than
okay.
I thought.
Okay.
Good. Multiply the odds to be in financial distress and the enterprise value. Where you can find the enterprise value in our case, again, in table 4. Which is the percent of enterprise value of the Ageo that we have to consider when we calculate the distress cost?
Asset.
Ditemi, don't be afraid. But do you think it's easy to estimate this percent? It's really hard.
They had to put up a model of 10,000 cases to...
No. In this case, 20%. Because someone else calculated for you. Okay? For the Ageo, the assumption is that is 20%. But do you think that 20% is we can apply it for all companies around the world? Would be a big mistake. For example, the railroads, you know railroads, treni, they have this cost around at 0 and 10%, while the biotechnology firm have 80%, not 18, 80%. My other question is way more difficult. Okay, on the answer you will find the answer on my slides. Which is the likelihood of financial distress for the Ageo? Don't give me the number because again, number is not simple to estimate. Do you think that the Ageo is in a bad situation or in a good situation? But you have to tell me why. What we have to look to assess the likelihood of financial distress? I heard around that one of you colleagues asked me something about which is the most important thing when we talk about finance. If the money enters the company, the cash flow. So we have to look the cash flow of the company. If the cash flow is stable, probably the likelihood of financial distress will be very low.
This company has a stable cash flow, and that's the reason why they suggest to increase flex.
Yes, you are right. It has a stable cash flow. Okay. But again, comparing Diageo with its competitors, what can we say? It's not anymore in table 4. This table 5, no. Okay. We have to look exhibit 7A and look the volatility of ROA. In this case, the cash flow, the proxy of cash flow is EBITDA divided by total asset, the ROA. They assume that they want to sell something, they instantly take money in their pocket. Okay? So if we look this table, we know that the volatility, your colleagues say that the cash flow seems stable, and I agree. The volatility of the Diageo cash flow is lower than all the other business units and competitors. Expected cost of financial distress are very low. Point E. We know this is the right policy after this discussion. Da italiano, vero? Can you answer my question?
Depends.
Depends. Okay, tell me why depends.
Depends what is our perception about risk. I mean, in this situation, for someone, even for me, I think, has a conservative policy about that, so I think it's okay. But for someone else, it's not a good idea. Should have more courage to take risk.
Okay. Okay. This is a rational point. And I agree with you. But if I remember correctly, I studied, now I teach, before I studied Modigliani Miller. And Modigliani Miller suggests there would be a trade-off between what? Tax shield and distress. So we have to estimate this trade-off. Because maybe we are not maximizing the value of our company, okay? You are right, you are not wrong. But we can add something more in our discussion. We don't know if this is the right financial policy of Diageo. We'll see later. Moreover, we forget to talk about financial flexibility. Financial flexibility is really important. If you are flexible, maybe you can catch an opportunity. Take that, invest, and make more money. So when we talk about financial policy, never forget financial flexibility. Because maybe we borrow a lot of money, we raise the value today, but in 1 year, if you need another money, maybe the bank will lend you the money, but your rating can be changed. You have to pay more interest. Financial flexibility is important. Before continuing the discussion on the trade-off, now, question number 3 is why is Diageo selling Pillsbury and spinning off Burger King? Before the answer, do you know another famous spin-off? Do you know what spin-off is?
Yeah. Actually, in this case, Burger King and Pillsbury are food companies, so in order to focus more on alcohol, they made Burger King a company by itself.
Exactly. Fiat and Ferrari. No, Ferrari, Fiat spin-off Ferrari. Okay. Another question is why all of you, and I agree with you, they answer me that they want to focus on alcohol and spirits, beer, etc., etc. But if the other business unit will be profitable, will you sell it or you will spin off it? Then depend the numbers. If this business unit continue to generate cash for shareholder, why when you go this business again? You will be making a mistake.
They want to be the leader, so no one else can do on this for the highest level. They want to be the position of.
They want to focus more on beer and alcohol, and the answer, because they want to do this, is here. I'm a shareholder, and I'm a shareholder. I looked at this graph, and probably I'm not happy. If I would be the CEO, neither. So I analyze my company with my team, and I say that Burger King and Pillsbury, come si chiama, are great business. But I don't have the skills to manage it properly, so it's time to sell them, spinning off. Okay. Also, if we see as shareholder, we see a lot of business unit inside Diageo, and we sometimes we are confused. We cannot understand what the aim of the company is, why they both another company that make cacciaviti, and so they want to focus on alcohol and beer because they know how to do alcohol and beer, spritz, Campari. When something is going wrong, you have to take action. Okay? If the price of your company is decreasing, you have to an alarm in your mind that is telling you that something is wrong. So if something doesn't work, let you get rid of it. Don't be afraid. Is it clear, everything? Question number 4. I take my notes. What was the model developed by Diageo's Treasury Group recommended for Diageo's optimal capital structure going forward? Where is the answer?
I suggest the company to do trials.
Okay.
And
They developed the Monte Carlo model, and maybe some of you will apply in your career, because it's a very good model that works when you have something that you miss, that you don't know, uncertainty. Okay? So, they have a lot of variables they put in the model. We don't see the model, we don't run the model, and they add output of the model. The output is telling us what? I take the responsibility, I'm the CFO, I will talk with the CEO, and you are my team. I don't understand anything about Monte Carlo and the output, but I'm the CFO. Or you will tell me about our simulation, because you are the expert of Monte Carlo, not me. Don't be afraid. Look, a small spoiler, the answer is in this figure. Okay? This figure tells us everything about what we have to do regarding financial policy of our company. Can you understand this figure? This is the result of the trade-off theory applied in the reality. So, where the cost, the trade-off is at the minimum level?
4.2.
Sorry? When the interest coverage ratio is 4.2. That it means that we maximize the value of our company targeting the interest coverage ratio nearly 4.2. Okay? So, now our target is between 5 and 8, if I'm not wrong. What we have to do? Be more conservative or more aggressive with the debt based on the result of our model?
More aggressive.
More aggressive.
Have to take more debt.
Take more debt, pay more interest. Our rating doesn't change, and we create more value for shareholder. So the target should be an interest coverage ratio around 4.2 and not 5 and 8.
Can I
ask why wouldn't the rating change if you're
Because in the is a right question. He asked me why if we take more debt the rating doesn't change. Because we put this variable in the model of Monte Carlo model. We don't want that our rating change. Okay, if you run a Monte Carlo model, if you read the case, you will see that they want that the rating doesn't change. At a level of 4.2, it doesn't change. Are you satisfied? It's night. And from home, do you have some question from home? Felice, are you here?
Yes, I'm here, but they have no question.
Ciao,
The
Felice.
presentation is absolutely perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. And last question, because this was the first model. This is real, eh? This is real. It's not Netflix program. That's
Sorry, Niccolo, there is questions about the pre-course test exam another time, and if you take me 2 seconds of your patience, I want to say that the exam will be in written form, as Professor Savi says, and 14 minutes and 20 multiple choices. On Monday at 9. It is mandatory to register. Thank you.
and then I will ask you some question on the case to pass it. Guys, the last question that was the most difficult, but I put it only for your pleasure. Oh, what are you talking about? Someone said. Reading the model. Does the model capture the dynamic nature of the capital structure problem well? What features, if any, if any, are missing from the model? Oh, this is, I don't pretend that you. One of the big problems of that model, our model, that we consider the financial distress cost the 20% of the firm. Can be a good estimation, or for our company, couldn't. But the most important, which is the other thing that we feature that we miss, e poi faccio andare a fare aperitivo. One thing that we already mentioned before, the financial flexibility. Our model doesn't consider the financial flexibility that I told you should be always considered when we take decision regarding financial policy of the firm. So, last thing, CFO and his team run again the model in reality, and they put option to measure the financial flexibility, and they decide to stick with the same interest coverage ratio that the firm had before. This is the end of our story. If you like this type of case, it's hard. And it's 5:30 of Friday. Guys, I really hope that you appreciate this case, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Ready?
Thank you very much.